everybody and welcome to Vlog Talk. Today we're going to be doing another recipe. We're going to be making chop. What chop is basically just a bunch of chopped up vegetables thrown into a mixture that's nutritionally balanced. That is something that you can give your birds every day. Typically with a parrot's diet, you want to give them a good nutritionally balanced pellet as like 50% of their diet. And then the other half of their diet has to be a good strong mixture of fruits and vegetables. Now for a lot of people, vegetables go bad really quick. Vegetables can get expensive when you're having to buy them that often. You only have 1 or 2 birds. They're not going through a whole swig of spinach and it's all just going bad. So chop is a way that many parrot owners prepare all these foods ahead of time so that way it's all finally chopped up, it's all ready to go, and you just have to pull some out of the fridge and serve it to them. There's a few different ways to make chop, but there's some very basic rules that we're going to follow today. You can use whatever the heck you want for this. This isn't by any means a recipe you have to follow word for word. The main things we're going to go here is that you need to have at least 2 to 3 different types of greens. You could have spinach, you could have alfalfa, you could have whatever the heck you want, arugula, broccoli, just as long as it's a green vegetable. Next you're going to want to have 2 different types, at least 1 to 2 different types of yellows and oranges. Now that can be squash, it could be sweet potato, it could be carrots, anything you want, yellow bell pepper, just to give them the nutrients that you would get from oranges and yellows. Lastly, you're going to want 1 to 2 different types of reds and purples, and that could be things like beets and red bell peppers. So the reason why you want to give them this much variety is because each colored vegetable has different nutrients. That's the reason why they come out those different colors. So it's the same reasons like, carrots are really high in vitamin A and good for your eyes and stuff like that. That's why they're orange. And leafy greens and things like that, they all have very different nutrient densities. So the more variety you can give them, the more you're covering those nutritional bases and giving them a little bit of everything. On top of the vegetable side of this, I like to add a few different things to my chop. And if you have birds that are more picky with their vegetables or really uncertain about certain things, you may find that adding things like seeds, like millets, or really tiny crushed up pieces of seeds they do enjoy can be a good way to get them to start checking things out, even if they're just kind of picking the seeds out of the mix. The seeds are still soaking up all the juices and moisture and nutrients from being mixed in with all the wet vegetables. So even though it looks like they're only eating the seeds, they are still getting used to the flavors and textures and acknowledging the fact that they're eating food that they know is food in a bunch of other things, that they're going to start gradually figuring out that everything in that dish is also food. So mixing in seeds, even if they're just picking out the seeds at first, does mean that they are still learning to get used to those flavors, and it is a very valid way to get birds to start to learn to eat vegetables. The different things I'm adding into my mix today are not really seeds because my guys are fine with eating their chop. They have no issues eating all their vegetables, so I don't need to add those things anymore. But I'm adding quinoa, which I use to help soak up some of the moisture, because I find when I start adding things like beets and red bell pepper, the mixture can get really, really wet, and then if you go to freeze it and thaw it, all the greens end out really soggy. So I add quinoa. You can also add things like oats to help soak up that moisture. And then I'm also adding bee pollen. Bee pollen I'm adding just because it does have a really weird high amount of amino acids and things like that, and newt does tend to pluck his feathers. So it's just kind of there for the added benefit of nutrition. It's also kind of a sweet flavor, so it encourages him to eat a little bit more. And it just has a really good nutrient profile that I like to add into my chops. And then lastly is coconut. It's shredded unsweetened coconut. You can get them in the bulk department as long as there's no weird preservatives or anything added to it. I add it again for newt because it is very high in omega-3s and omega-6s. So the last thing I'm adding in here also is shredded coconut. And the reason I'm adding that is for newt again because he is a plucker. It has a lot of omegas in it, so it's going to help hydrate his skin, help hydrate his feathers, and reduce the odds of his skin being dry being a cause for his plucking. Now for newt, his plucking is mostly behavioral. It's mostly due to stress and due to hormonal changes. But it's just a nice additive to have there to guarantee that drying out his skin isn't a cause for it. So I add it there just for that. It also makes good texture because it is a nut. It is quite oily, so a lot of birds quite enjoy coconut, so it's a good thing to add that spreads across all the vegetables easily. So when picky little Mia, wherever she is right now, decides she doesn't want to eat something, she'll still be picking at the coconut and getting a taste of everything else, and it helps bring her back into eating her vegetables normally. So for my chop, the greens I'm going to be adding are spinach, which you need to make sure that you rinse off the leaves very thoroughly first. I've got broccoli. Broccoli I use a lot for Mia because of the little tiny seed-like florets on the top. And then I've got a tri-mixture of greens. I've got arugula, red leaf lettuce, and green leaf lettuce. And then lastly is a turnip, and I've used this turnip before. Yeah, Newt really loves turnip. It's very kind of potato-like, so he tends to go for it quite intensely. But I just make sure we're gonna peel this guy first before throwing it into our chop and making sure that the stem and the root are chopped off. For our yellows and oranges, I have a carrot. If you wanted, you could also get a bag of baby carrots, just so it's a little bit easier. The only thing with this guy is you want to make sure you chop off the ends and peel it, just because it can be dirty. And then I have a bit of a weird mixture here. We actually had spaghetti squash for dinner the other day, and we don't eat the seeds and stuff, right? The birds can, so I keep the raw seeds along with all the innards and gooey good stuff. So I just find it's a nice little additive where they think it's a treat because it's a seed, but it is quite healthy for them. The next orange and yellow category food I have is this. It doesn't really count because I'm not really using this part, but we had omelets this morning, so I'm going to be using up the seeds because obviously people don't really eat the seeds. But the birds can have them just fine, so I'm just going to flake all those off, add it in, gives it a little bit more texture, makes it a little more interesting, and the birds really quite enjoy the seeds, so I mean, why not, right? The last orange I have is sweet potato. Now this we experimented with a little bit. You can see they're quite hard. We went and we bought a regular sweet potato or yam or whatever, just because I find birds really like them. Mia quite enjoys it, and it's really good for maintaining good feather quality and giving them that good kind of luster and glossy shine. But I always find when I add sweet potato, I have to make the sweet potato balls, which was the recipe I did last time. But I want to be able to mix it into a chop and not have it be so wet. So what we did was we took a sweet potato, we chopped it into big cubes, we boiled it just like we do in the other recipe, but then we took it out when it was still a little bit firm, and we chopped it up into these tiny, tiny, tiny bite-sized birdie pieces. And then we threw it in the oven at 350 degrees for probably about 5 minutes. It wasn't very long, just until they firmed up. And now I'll be able to mix this into the chop, and as you can hear, they're quite dry, they're quite crunchy. So now it's not going to be a wet, mushy mess, and I can make a proper chop mix of vegetables instead of a mashed potato puree mix. So I'm really excited to see how that works out, because this is the first time I've tried doing this with them, but we'll see how it goes. And for the last category, we have our reds and purples. Now, I use a red bell pepper. It's always my go-to. It's always my default. Just because Newt loves bell pepper. When you put the dish down, this is the first thing he runs for. So I've got the bell pepper. It has been cut. It has already been used a few times before for them. And again, it's got the seeds. The only thing I'm not going to be using in here is kind of the white flesh and the stem. But everything else in here they can have. The seeds especially are something they really enjoy, as I've already said. So I'm going to make sure that I add some of those in there. The next red, I'm not going to take off the paper towel, is a beet. This has been pre-peeled. If you have a whole raw beet from the grocery store, just make sure you peel it, make sure you wash it really well. I also am going to soak this in paper towel and try and kind of just sap out as much of that moisture as possible, because as I've said, sometimes when you're mixing all these vegetables together, your mixture can get really, really wet, and beet I find is one of the worst for that. So we're just gonna make sure that we try and get as much of this moisture out of this beet. So last up from our reds category is pomegranate seeds. Pomegranates aren't really in season right now, so the seeds don't look that great, and I might not end up adding them. With fruits, I won't actually be adding this into the mixture. I add it in when I serve it. And the reason for that is that fruits are very, very wet. And as I've already said, you really want to make sure that your chop mixture isn't super wet and sloppy. Otherwise your greens are going to get soggy and flimsy, and it's not going to be good. So how much of everything do we want? This part is kind of lenient. It's not super specific on how much you need. The only thing I would say you need to focus on is to make sure that greens make up the majority of the mixture. Realistically, when parrots are out and about and flying and eating vegetables naturally, they're eating a lot of leafy greens, more so than they are a red bell pepper or a root vegetable that's hiding in the ground. So most of their diet is going to be green based. So when you're giving them, fresh vegetables, you want to try and replicate that as closely as possible. Do some research into your specific species, see what foods they eat most naturally and what things make up most of their diet, and kind of balance your chop based on that. So how much I use is super sporadic every single time. I try to make enough for like a couple weeks, and then I can keep it in the fridge and then it's fresh every time. What I used to do was put it into a container and freeze it, but unfortunately I found that the greens just kept getting wet and I really just wanted to move to a more fresh sort of way of serving it. So I've been trying to do that, but sometimes I make enough for a week, sometimes I make enough for 2 months, and it's just all over the place. So I'm still trying to figure it out. What we're gonna go for today is we're gonna do about half a cup of each different green. We've got half a cup of broccoli, half a cup of spinach, half a cup of green leaf lettuce, half a cup of arugula, and half a cup of red leaf lettuce. So I'm just gonna set this all aside in a separate container, and we will move on to the yellows and oranges. I forgot the turnip. So the turnip is a little different because I have enough of the other greens. So I'm probably only gonna do about a quarter cup of the turnip. And basically, we're gonna move the bird. We're just gonna cut a chunk off, be about a quarter cup, and we're just gonna peel it and toss it in with the rest. There you go. So we've got a good chunk. We cut off the side, make it nice and fresh looking. There we go. So we've got a fresh chunk of turnip that could kind of be a quarter cup, and we're just gonna plunk it in with the rest of our greens. Moving on to our yellows and oranges here. I'm just gonna quickly take the bowl, I'm gonna be throwing it all in, and I'm just gonna take all these seeds off with the bell pepper. Yeah, like a third of a cup. So we'll do a third of a cup of the innards and seeds and all that good stuff. Next for yellows and oranges is gonna be our carrot. And like I said with this guy, we just want to make sure that we chop off the ends and peel it. So I'm just going to go ahead and quickly peel it now. We're only going to do about a quarter cup of carrot, so I'm probably not going to need to cut the other half, just as I'm not using the whole thing. So you just want to quickly get rid of all that skin and just chunk it off. I'm going to break it into smaller blocks so I can see how much more I'm going to need. And there you go. So approximately a quarter cup of carrot. And then we've got our sweet potato, which is probably a couple tablespoons actually. Got one. Yeah, so like 2 tablespoons of our dried up sweet potato. Last up is our reds. So like I said, the pomegranate I'm gonna leave aside. I'm not gonna add it into the mixture. I'll add it in when I serve it. Our guy here, I'm gonna do about a quarter of this, of an average sized bell pepper. And we're just gonna cut out that white flesh that nobody really likes. Just chop off the ends a little bit, clean it up. There we go. So yeah, about a quarter of an average sized bell pepper, just one of the nubs off the bottom. And we're just gonna throw that guy in a bowl as is. If you wanted a measurement, it's probably honestly about another quarter cup. Yeah, about another quarter cup of red bell pepper. So the last thing here is the beet. And as I've said, we really gotta make sure this beet is dry. So I'm gonna grab my paper towel and just squeeze the life out of this beet. And I'm probably only going to use about a quarter of this beet. So I'm going to grab some fresh paper towel and we're just going to dry off this quarter really intensely. And that's again probably another quarter cup or so, a little less than a quarter cup of beet. And we're just going to chuck it in and go from there. Okay, so like I said, I was going to show you guys how the food processor handles these vegetables. So we've got our 3 different categories here. We've got all of our greens, we've got our reds and purples, and then we have our yellows and oranges. And as you can see, these two combined is a little bit less than the amount of greens that are in here. And that's perfect. That's exactly the way we want it to be. The majority of this mixture should be leafy green vegetables. So what we're gonna go ahead and do here is we're just gonna throw it all on in. It doesn't really matter what order. I usually put the things that are a little harder to chew up in first, just so that way they're at the bottom by the blades, and it's gonna make it a little easier for the machine to do its job. If I put all the greens at the bottom, it'll kind of get stuck. So we're gonna do that, the bell pepper, our beet, and then we're gonna stuff all of our greens in. Initially, when I first started using the food processor, I did have some troubles with adding the beet in here, and it turned the whole mixture like a mushy red. I haven't had that problem since I've started drying them all off, but if you do have that problem, I found that blending everything up and then kind of adding the beet in afterwards and giving it just a quick pulse, that kind of fixed the problem. Okay, so we've got all the vegetables in there. What I'm gonna add now is those last guys I mentioned. So I've got the coconut, the quinoa, the beet pollen, and I've also got a cuttlebone, which I know I didn't mention at the beginning of this video. The cuttlebone is for calcium. Newt and Mia both have some issues with maintaining proper calcium levels, so I personally just put some of this into the vegetables because most birds really actually don't like chewing on a cuttlebone. So doing it this way, they kind of have to eat it while they're enjoying the rest of their vegetables. It's just a good way to get them that calcium intake and get them proper nutrition by kind of tricking them into it. We're gonna add the amount of quinoa in that I think it's gonna take to soak up the moisture. So I'm gonna do 2.5 tablespoons of quinoa. For the coconut, we're not gonna add a lot in. This coconut is quite fatty. It's just there to provide a little bit more of the omegas to help support healthy skin. So we're just gonna do 1 tablespoon. We'll do about the same for the beet pollen, just 1 tablespoon. This is just a little additive, it's not the bulk of the nutrition. And then lastly, I don't really measure out the cuttlebone, mostly just because it's awkward for me to measure it out. But I just kind of take a knife and kind of grind it in. It's okay if it's chunky because, again, the food processor is going to blend most of it. All right, we'll go with that. So we're just gonna pop our lid on, make sure it's tight and secure, make sure the suction cup feet on the food processor are fully secured, and we're gonna go ahead and blend this all up. Okay, so 4 pulses, and this is what we've got. Stick my hand in. The pieces are actually already quite fine, quite small. Everything's actually looking pretty blended, so this is kind of a bad example. There's a few pieces in there that are a little big. So I'll put it on for a little bit more, make it a little bit finer. All right, so put it on number 1 for a little bit. So what we've got here is a good mixture of kind of different sizes and textures. You can see how the broccoli sort of flaked off into all those little pieces, which is a good thing for birds that are a little bit more picky. Everything is evenly distributed. The color of this mixture is perfect. So when everything's blended out, you want it to be dominantly green. You don't want to see mostly any other color because you want the bulk of the nutrition to be the greens, right? When you've got too much of everything else, the nutrition just isn't balanced properly. So when you're looking at a mixture, you want to look at this and say the majority of this is green, and that's perfect. That's exactly where we want to be. All right, so this is the final chopped mixture in the Birds' Veggie dish. I'm just gonna add that pomegranate to it now, and we'll see if it's a winner. She's the picky one, so if she likes it, then it's a winner. Alright, so that's gonna about do it for this video. I hope your guys' birds like it as much as mine do. Even picky little Mia is going to town on the vegetables right now, so I'm counting it as a success. I'm going to answer this now because I get a lot of questions on it already, and I know there's going to be a lot of comments down below asking how much to give your birds. And the answer to that is that it doesn't really matter. You can give them as much as they're willing to eat. Vegetables are a very huge part of their diet. It's not something you want to say like, oh, you only get a teaspoon, and when you're done, that's it. However, generally speaking, really big birds like macaws and cockatoos and African greys, they usually only eat about 3 maybe tablespoons. So keep that in mind. Smaller guys, it's usually about a teaspoon, half a teaspoon that they'll actually eat in one sitting. I like to kind of do vegetables where they get a bit in the morning and a bit in the evening, so it's presented with all their other meals too. Otherwise, really, they can only fit so much food in their crop at one time. So when you're giving them all of this in one go, they're not going to be able to eat all this. Half of this is not going to be able to even fit inside of them. So being able to just give them a little bit in the morning and a little bit in the evening gives them the option to get as much nutrition as possible without having to leave it out all day. As with any fresh food or fresh vegetable and whatnot, do make sure that you're taking this away after about an hour. You don't want bacteria to start developing. You don't want your birds to get sick. Leaving any sort of wet food out for times that long can start to get dangerous with bacteria growth, so just be cautious of that. And yeah, so that's gonna about do it. Anything else to say, my dude? Yes, that's gonna do it for this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all in the next one. Bye.